So rather than doing an introduction in that, like I normally would do, I reckon we just kick it off from here. So obviously I'm Macca and you're Zekatar, and this is our second video together. And this time we're going to be talking about the Solar Auxilia and the Imperial Militia in 30k. Two more, should I say, underplayed
Yeah,
or
in a way they
underrepresented
sure are.
factions? I
You
don't know.
don't see them very often in any battle reports or even in local games. Ah,
Would you care to take a
for
guess at
Solar
why that is, you
Auxilia,
think?
I think it's pretty much because of the price tag attached to the army. It's the most expensive army you can play in all of Heresy because everything is resin and you need a lot of it. And for the militia, I think it's a little bit that people don't want to play Cadians, but they don't have an idea what they could do otherwise for the models to represent a proper militia. That's just my guess why you don't see them that often. And in addition, they lack, I would say, cool choices. They are all solid, but nothing sticks out as a very, fancy thing like a Sicaran tank or something.
Yeah, definitely. My personal opinion is, well, Solar Auxilia, not only are they incredibly expensive, but they're too detailed. I think the average person, they want to build and paint an army in a relatively short period of time, especially if they've got family commitments, that kind of thing. So, a whole army where the detail is equivalent to marine characters, I think is very off-putting for people. Further to that, the militia, the lack of miniatures, beyond going for, say, a full Death Corps of Krieg army from Forge World, people just don't really want to play with Arcadians
But
and
this is the
Catachans, I
funny
don't
thing
think.
because there are so many options with Gene Stealers combined with Necromunda or anything I have seen out there. You can do so much cool stuff. Yeah, but people, I don't know, maybe it's too expensive then for them, or they just,
Well, that's you're
yeah,
talking a
basically.
solution that's more expensive than
I
the
mean,
Solar
I for
Auxilia.
myself, I am playing Militia. I have around 2,500 points. And I did the Cadian hostile environment sets because they have all this rebreather stuff and the big backpacks. And yeah, that got rather pricey in some areas as well because just of the amount of upgrade sets you need.
Yeah, they do look really nice though with the rebreathers, the hostile environment set. So, if people aren't sure what that is, I think in
That there are,
there's a command box for the
yeah, and there's
Cadians, and
also
there's like one guy
two
wearing one in
upgrade
that.
sets. One just with rebreather heads and one with big backpacks and full on closed helmets.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that when people think of the Imperial Army in 30k Imperial Militia, they probably think back to those old visions of Heresy images where they look a lot like Vostroyans.
Yeah,
And
but
Vostroyans
maybe
are
maybe we should
prohibitively
go a little bit
expensive.
in what are actually the background topics of the militia and the Solar Auxilia and where they are different from each other just from a fluff perspective.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So the Solar Auxilia are probably the starting point because, well, they were in Book 4, the Militia came in Book 5, so we'll just go in chronological order.
Okay.
The Solar Auxilia are specialised void warfare segment. So essentially, if you can't get a hold of Space Marines, they're the next best thing.
Yeah, pretty much that, yeah.
Because of this, they're generally very elite regiments, a lot of elite war gear, very specialised war gear. They're the apex. Now, that isn't
Yep.
to say that there aren't more specialised regiments of the Imperial Army. there are regiments that come from Terra, that have, prescribed Dark Age technology, and or there's some crazy commando regiment, but they're very much the exception to the rule. The Solar Auxilia are very much the broad backbone, most elite regiments of the Imperial Army. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, pretty much. They are called Solar Auxilia actually because they origin from the solar system. At least their equipment pattern is from the Saturnine Void clans, they are called, I guess. So they actually have a pretty long history back in the Great Crusade. And this is also the reason why they have this high-tech equipment.
Yeah, definitely, because the Saturnine moons, for those who don't know, in 30k, basically Saturn, its moons, and the space stations around it were home to a sort of mix of peoples who were used to void warfare and fighting on airless moons, that kind of thing. So it made an ideal recruiting pool for these people, and obviously they already had the equipment required, so they sort of adapted it and adopted it into the wider Imperial Army.
And not only they provided the first Solar Auxilia, they also provided some of the best ships during the Great Crusade.
Yeah, that's right. The Saturnine and Jovian shipyards sort of rivaled or even eclipsed Mars just in sheer scale. Very much a thing. Like we do remember things like Saturnine patterns of Terminator armor, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah, and in contrast, you have the militia, and the militia, it is portrayed in the books a little bit just like as this planetary defense force, but at least in my opinion, they are more the backbone of the entire Great Crusade. They are the masses the Imperium can muster to flood every enemy they ever would encounter, and they are in their quality of troops, maybe even a little bit under the current 40k Imperial Army or Astra Militarum, and they can range from anything that is like, I don't know, conscripted levies to what you would know as Tempestus Scions or other commando elite special troops.
For sure, for sure. I don't know if they make up the majority of the Imperial Army, but they are made up of retired veterans of the Great Crusade who, they've fought over X amount of campaigns and therefore they get to retire. Because this wasn't 40k where it's unending war. In 30k, you were more like the old Roman legions. You fought for a set amount of time, and then once you were old enough, because age is very much a limiting factor on someone's combat prowess. Once you get too old, that kind of thing, you get to retire, or you fight in a campaign and your reward for fighting in that campaign is you get to settle down. A lot of these guys worked with rogue traders or the early exploration fleets, or they were left behind to form garrisons on planets by the Space Marines,
and the thing is,
as well as young people.
And the thing is, when you're consistently fighting besides Space Marine legions, there's a very good chance that you actually get old in the army, because you can actually survive this with this kind of support. In contrast to 40k, where it's basically you are from the training directly into the meat grinder.
Exactly, and the style of the regiment depends not just on the people themselves, but on the particular world they're on. Because unlike in 40k, which again is very standardized because it's so far, 10,000 years in the future, it's a completely different universe at that point. But in 30k, they could come from a planet which is a backwater like Catachan is, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they might very much look like Catachans in how they operate. However, you also might have a group of them which comes from some planet which survived the Dark Age of technology relatively intact and is almost a utopia with, sort of like Tau levels of technology, perhaps.
And they look maybe a little bit like the Necromunda Vanzar. Very futuristic, and you could say it does not look like 40k because it's so far off from this gothic look, but that's just because it's, high tech, really high tech, even from the 40k standpoint of.
Yeah, exactly. The Van Sars is a great example of what could be a very high-tech militia regiment. And you also have to keep in mind, because it's not 40k, they aren't semi-religious or religious like 40k, so you won't see the sort of iconography of aquillas and priests and that kind of thing running around everywhere. They're very much more like a modern military on Earth of today.
Well, they
Very
can
conventional tactics.
they can be religious towards the end of the heresy when the whole Church of the Emperor spreads. But yeah, especially in the beginning and middle of the Great Crusade, they are just a regular military.
Now, because of this, their tactics are very, what we would call sensible, I suppose. They're
Most of
not
the time,
like
probably,
the
yeah.
Imperial Guard of 40k, where they'll just keep throwing bodies at the meat grinder, sort of like the Battle of Verdun. In 30k, they will try and use tactics against their enemies. They will call for reinforcements, the Imperial Army. And in the case of Imperial Militia, they're really just a planetary defense force who are holding out for something better to come along or to crush minor rebellions.
Well,
And
yeah,
the heresy just sort of presses them into taking on a bigger role.
that's totally true. But as we don't have a real Imperial army list, the militia is the next best thing to represent them actually on the table.
Yeah. Without a proper Imperial Army list, it's definitely the next best go-to until such time as we get one.
And when you have these different provenances that can change the appearance of the armies that greatly, that is actually pretty good represented in the rules by something that is called Provenances of War. And you have a couple of them, and you can almost freely choose between, or you can almost freely choose two of them for your army, and they will affect the way you play them.
I don't know if you remember playing the 4th Ed Imperial Guard Codex at all.
I started
but it
in
kind of
5th
reminds
edition.
me of that. Right, so in the 4th Ed Codex, the way they worked at that time was you had a set of buffs and debuffs to pick from. And there was minor and major, and for every, you got a choice of one minor and one major essentially. And for every major or minor buff you got, you had to pick a debuff as well. And that would apply to your whole army, so you could pick something like all deep striking stormtroopers, for instance. But if you lost all your stormtroopers, for instance, then you might lose extra victory points, or perhaps you couldn't take tanks. Like there was some major debuffs there, and the Provenances very much goes back to that style of army list, because it can dramatically change how the list actually functions, where the militia all stay at the same stats on paper, but then you might go for, as I say earlier, the tech guild type elite, where they end up with increased strength on their weapons, or they might end up with better armor or more toughness, but they always exchange it for something else.
And you pay points for the buffs. So even if they do not have a backdraw, then it's maybe expensive or not that strong. Because a lot of those buffs focus around getting them better in close combat, or at least some of them. And to say they are good then would be an overstatement, because even 20 guys with a close combat provenance will still lose to 10 Space Marines in 80% of the time.
Yeah, and if those Space Marine legions are very combat oriented, like World Eaters, Blood Angels, you run into something like Gelvorback, oh boy. It doesn't matter how many buffs you put on your militia, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, the most telling one was I had once 20 militia guys against against one Custodes, and they got wiped without a question.
Yeah, yep, that pretty believable. I mean, Custodes can wipe whole units of Space Marines charging them. So, yeah. I myself, by the way, have a Solar Auxiliary army, about 3,000 points worth. Mostly a sort of tank-heavy one with Dracosans, which are their sort of dedicated transport tank, their main one. I've also got a single Taurox, not Taurox, the the Aurochs,
The Rhino. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, which kind of works with them, but doesn't with the Imperial Militia, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sure.
So, do we want to go into the Provenances of War for people so they can sort of understand what it actually does change up?
Yeah, that would
and also
be really
sort
helpful.
of the criteria that kick it off. Because the biggest criteria of Provenance of War is you do need to take that Force Commander. And he's kind of a big deal because he's probably going to be the make or break part of your army.
Maybe then let's start with the Force Commander and then go over the Provenances, one by one.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, well, with the Force Commander you have a 0 to 1 choice, so you can take one at a maximum. And he is, with 50 points, rather expensive for what he brings, because he costs the same as a Centurion, but is nowhere near the quality. But he can give your army multiple things. For a start, you can upgrade him to choose your warlord trait from the Militia warlord traits table, and there are some good in there. He can actually be a decent close combat fighter for a non-Space Marine. And he has a rather high leadership, which we can come later to, which is really important in a militia army.
Yeah, I think the two probably standout warlord traits to me out of all the warlord traits that are available to him, that if you're going to pick them, is Merchant Princeling, which is one squad of gaming player's choice of the infantry type, counts all of their ranged weapons as having an AP of 1, better than normal, so AP 6 becomes 5, etc., which can be incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And Beloved of the People, which is if you lose your warlord, then the whole army, everyone with the infantry type, gains hatred, which can be huge if you've still got a lot of your army left at the point he dies.
In a smaller game, I also like Marcher Lord, where he becomes scoring, and then you can bury him in a squad of Ogrins or something, and this having as a scoring unit is also not too bad.
Yeah, with the because it also grants stubborn when you're within 3 inches of an objective, doesn't it? So they sort of become an immovable unit of Ogrins, and yeah, that can be pretty handy.
Especially because with Militia you pretty much run in the problem that you don't have enough troops choices. In my 2500 points, I have all 6 troop choices full, and the thing is that I cannot rely on them surviving the game. Because they do die rather fast when the enemy wants them to.
There's only one combination as the Provenance of War that will get you through the game. That's if you take the Penal Legion one in the max squads and then give them all the Feel No Pain and Stubborn. But that's very specific
didn't
criteria.
Want to paint that. I didn't want to paint that.
Nobody wants to paint that. That's why nobody runs that. Actually, I knew a guy who ran that in the Lost and the Damned list. Is it
Yeah.
I always forget which one it is. The Bride of War that allows you to take a mix of Astartes and Militia. Army of Dark Compliance. Sorry.
The Tyrants something, or you mean in Heresy? In Heresy, it's the Dark Compliance.
It's the Army of Dark Compliance.
Yeah.
And he was running just Leviathan Dreadnoughts mixed in with that.
I mean,
like 6 Leviathans and then 300 infantry with Feel No Pain and Stubborn.
Just a quick
that tends to cause problems.
Just a quick side note there. I just for fun wrote an army list around 2000 points with 300 men and I think it was 8 Leman Russ Demolishers and still a little room for characters. That is also something you don't want to play against.
Yeah, that's rough. I guess something like a very flyer-heavy force would cause that a lot of problems.
But it couldn't win
But that's
because
about it.
flyers cannot win. Yeah, but back to the provenances. Um,
Yes.
we're just taking turns and going over them.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to pick out just some of your favorites and some of the ones you really dislike, perhaps?
Okay, starting with the ones I really dislike, it has to be said it's Survivors of the Dark Age. Because Survivors of the Dark Age, what it does is it gives all your troops +1 armor, um, and it allows you to upgrade the laser weapons of your grenadiers with +1 strength, but it forces you to take grenadiers as your compulsory troops. And it gives you some Space Marine transport options for several units. So this is rather good. It's not the best, I think, but it's good because it gives you those reliable backbone of troops that is almost Space Marines for really dirt cheap points. And the thing, the reason that I don't like it is that when you see a militia army, 80% of the time it's with survivors of the Dark Age.
Yeah, it's very much a go-to for people because there's almost no negatives to it. Whereas, you know, it's something I always harp on about is if something's a no-brainer to take, well, then that means there's a problem with it or your other options.
Yeah. Um,
Which is something I say with the Dark Angels acid rounds for the heavy bolters is a great example of that because you've got a weapon that is just better in every way, so why wouldn't you do it?
oh, because you can't pop rhinos with it then.
Hmm. Yeah. You hear this world's smallest violin playing somewhere?
Okay. Um, and my two favorites, because they are on the same note, what they are doing basically, are Warrior Elite and Alchem Jackers. And most of the time I run those two together, um, except when I feel a little bit guilty about it, because uh, Warrior Elite gives your entire army +1 leadership, and in an army where the basic leadership is 6 or 7, this is a huge deal. And Alchem Jackers makes the army basically stubborn in close combat, but the big thing is that whenever the squad would run away, it is instead pinned. So your army is basically not movable by morale anymore. It can be pinned, but many squads that are pinned then do not shoot good anyway. Because most of the time it doesn't really matter if those 20 laser rifles are shooting or not.
Um, yeah, morale is such a huge thing for the militia because generally they have such low morale. If you can get them to hang around, it greatly enhances the survivability of your army as a whole because they've got so many bodies to wade through. It can make it very daunting for someone who's running Marines or Mechanicum to deal with if they're throwing their models at you and you can't actually move them. It's a huge deal, and I think people really underrate it.
Yeah, what would be.
I'd say probably.
Yeah,
I was just going to say the one that I dislike most is probably cyber medics. Uh, which is
it adds a
it's
lot of
35
rolling.
points.
It adds a lot of rolling to the game.
A lot of rolling that sadly doesn't do much, which is, the worst of both worlds. Because what it does, it gives your entire army a 6+ invulnerable save, but the thing is, you're going to lose the ability to run and sweeping advance, because you're going to get a -1 penalty to it, and you're already only initiative 3, which means you're going to be the equivalent of initiative 2, which means every single fight you're involved in, you're pretty much going to get run down or fail to sweep someone.
That doesn't matter too
great.
much, because when you are in a close combat, you either are already dead or you want to die so you can shoot at your enemy again. So that is not too bad.
Well, yeah, maybe.
The run
I like how
distance.
you turn the negative into the positive there.
The run distance is a little bit of a bigger problem because, well, the militia had for a long time the problem that their main transport, the Gorgon, wasn't out of production. So they could get over the table, but they had to move forwards every turn. And with the -1 to your run rolls, this is maybe a problem depending on your rolling on your runs.
Well, we should really point out, because it's directly related to that, is the two main dedicated transports are the critical failing of the entire militia list, in my opinion. Because your only two choices essentially boils down to the Gorgon and the Rhino. Now, whether you call it the Rhino or the Aurochs, those are your choices. Okay, occasionally, if you take Survivors of the Dark Age, you could take something like a Land Raider.
Or an actual Rhino.
But, yeah, that's right. But the problem with them is that the Gorgon is this huge, super heavy transport. And it's expensive, it's big, and it might not suit the theme we've got in mind, and it actually has quite a few points for what it actually offers. Conversely...
Let me interject there really, really fast, because the Gorgon is rather expensive, but when you read its options, you can add a lot of laser cannons to it for a rather low points. So then it's
I think
kind
it's a
of
great,
worth
reliable weapons platform, but it's expensive for what it's giving.
It is.
Not just points-wise, but financially. A lot of money to spend if you want to have any significant number of them.
When I started Heresy, I just said, I don't care anymore. When I want a model, I will get it. So the financial aspect is not always my biggest concern there.
Well, that's true, but unfortunately for a lot of people it is, I think.
Sure.
Now, to add to that, though, the vehicle is at its best when you drive them into the heart of your enemy and let them get blown up. Being a super heavy vehicle, when they do blow up,
I was
it's
never a
pretty
fan
hilarious.
of that.
Well, it's why they removed the super heavy rule from the Legion Malkadors. Because they gave the same explosions rule to those as Titans. Yeah, they got rid of the super heavy vehicle from the
I know
Malkador.
I know that, but is this really the reason? Doesn't matter. It's not the topic here.
Yeah, that was the reason. Now, the Aurochs. The Aurochs is essentially a Rhino. Slightly different war gear options, because it's a solar / militia vehicle. But the problem with it is the only squads that can fit inside it are Grenadiers. Now,
And
Grenadiers are a good unit.
Yeah, but you want
But you
12
want
of
them
them.
with plasma guns.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you say, you want 12 of them, because you have to purchase additional members for the squad with plasma guns. You don't just upgrade the existing squad members.
And the Aurochs and the Rhino can only fit 10, so...
So you can't have them at all in those vehicles, which sucks. You're either running them with their poor weapons choice, or you take them with the good weapon, but then they can't use the cheap transport that logically should be able to take them, which is a huge failing, I think, in the army.
the militia also has access to two different transports. It's the Arvus and the Termite. The Termite has the big problem, which Marines love this because Marines come out of reserve turn 1 and can do things. In my opinion, from my experience, militia don't want this because when they turn up turn 1, they are dead. And you want your troops to survive the game if possible, to score something. So you can put 12 grenadiers into a termite, but then you are sacrificing them 100% of the time.
Well, the huge deal that people forget is that Grenadiers are armor value 4, but there is so much AP4 weaponry in Legion and Mechanicum lists. You don't realise it until you play with something that only has a 4 plus armor save. How many things will ignore your armor save? And so they come up in that Termite and you think, oh yeah, this could be trouble.
They
and
can
then
do stuff.
You wipe the squad out with your Kiri's Dreadnought or
Autocannons. They have toughness and strength 3. That is a big deal when you are getting charged by a tactical squad with no extra weapons and they demolish you with the combat result. It's not that they kill so much in your unit, but the result of the combat will always be in the favor of the Marines, and they will wipe you by this.
A big favourite of Marine players is to throw a crack grenade before they assault, because it's just a guaranteed 1 kill, basically, as long as you hit.
Frag grenades are not too bad either, but yeah. And
if you're charging like the 5 plus save militia, no worries. If you're charging grenadiers, throw a crack grenade at them. Just delete a grenadier.
The thing is, just on a side note here, even when I shoot against Marines, I sometimes use the frag grenade because with the frag grenade, when you are hitting at least 3 models, it is statistically even better than a crack grenade because your average should be 1 wound, and with a crack grenade it's a little bit under 1 wound statistically. So frag grenades are underestimated in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. If you're using them against Marines with militia, it's flat out better than your las weapons. So
yeah, and that is yeah. And the last transport option they have is the Arvus, and for my force I have 2 of them because they are a really good choice for a multitude of reasons. At first, it's a flyer that is rather sturdy for its points cost, with 11, 11, 10, and 3 hull points. That is actually quite a lot for 75 points. Compared to Marine fighters, for example. Transport capacity of 12, so you can transport your Grenadier squad with special weapons wherever you want them. And you can upgrade it with some decent weapons choices. So the funny thing is that in a dogfight, an Arvus can actually threaten something like a lightning.
Definitely. The Arvus is something I hated for the longest time, but in the militia list, it actually works. I know some people like to take it in the Mechanicum list, but that's... I don't really like it.
You don't have something you can really good transport there in the Arvus. I mean, the Arvus strikes terror in the hearts of your enemies, if you want to say so, when you fill it with heavy flamers that got AP3 with Merchant Princeling.
Yep, definitely a scary unit in that regard. The only thing it suffers from is that typical thing with flyers, which is either your flyer is going to go uncontested, the enemy hasn't planned for aircraft, and so you're going to have free reign with it, you're going to come on where you want, you're going to put your troops down where you want.
Or there's a single mortis dreadnought.
It's the opposite. Yeah. Or a Deredeo, or even in a worst case scenario, someone For example, there's Sons of Horus Army, Active Heresy, a mate of mine had, which I showed on the channel. And he has 2 Storm Eagles and 2 Fire Raptors in it. If you're bringing 2 Arvis Lighters on against that, good luck.
Well, in these cases, at least the Arvus can boost forwards to get the troops to some point on the game where it then can die and drop them, hopefully not all dying.
I mean, you're fighting uphill anyway against that
Yeah,
because when all those autocannons and heavy bolters in the Fire Raptors turn around and point at your Grenadiers, they're screwed.
sure.
No matter what you do, they're screwed.
So, but yeah, when you take all this together, you don't have very good options in the militia list to transport your large groups of infantry because your scoring units that are your backbone for actual scoring, because grenadiers in the most cases are there to do some damage and then most likely die, but your actually scoring units mainly consist of 20-man groups, and to transport them without the Gorgon is actually not possible. Yes, there is this Baneblade variant, but I do not consider it part of the army list.
The Storm, not
Lord?
Stormhammer, is it?
I think it's the
Storm
Lord.
Lord, maybe? It's the one with the 2 big Vulcan
Yeah.
Mega Bolter on the front. Yeah, that one works pretty well in Solar Auxilia. If you fill it full of Valataris with power axes and medics, but it's sort of a one-trick pony. If it gets blown up, that's your army done.
Yeah, pretty much. And
Militia just don't have access to that kind of equipment. You will not see big squads of power weapons in militia armies, for instance. It's just not how they roll.
maybe a small point on this later, but yeah, this is the reason you want to enable your troops to get over the board by foot and actually survive this relatively intact. And that is a big issue because even with Marines, you normally say when they have to walk, they will die. And with militia, that's, yeah, your starting point.
I think also just worth mentioning for the record, if there's one legion you never want to go up against as militia, I think it's the World Eaters. Because
Or Blood Angels. It's just
Blood
the
Angels
same
are
with all
bad.
the assault
The
cannons
only difference
everywhere.
would be that the assault cannons is horrifying. Also Salamanders. Salamanders, the amount of heavy flamers they can bring, and boosted flamers is terrifying. If you're in 5+ armor,
Yeah.
good luck. But the World Eaters I specifically bring up because any of their squads have to touch any of yours and they will die because they have so many attacks, they are so durable, they always have apothecaries in their squads, so they're hard to shift. They don't pay any extra to get chain axes, so nothing in your army will even get a save.
But
So
Marines,
it's bad enough being charged by Space Marines as militia because you will just lose models and lose combats. But when nothing survives, I mean, in theory, you say, okay, it's great. They're going to kill them. The Marines are going to kill the squad, but then I'm going to get to shoot the Marines. Well, unfortunately, the World Eaters are so... because it's just built into them that they're good at combat. It's not an effective trade. If they're trading 10 Marines to kill a 30-man squad or something, then that's not a great trade for you because they're not going to run out of Marines before they're in your back line, and they've got a lot of cool toys. Like, they've got their own tanks, they've got their own dreadnoughts, and when they get into your lines as militia, you're going to have a rough time.
I would defer there a little bit because it's not about the legion you're facing, but more like what the legion is, or the army is consisting of, because it is right that every Marine squad in close combat will kill you. It doesn't need to be World Eaters. The only question is, how fast will it be at your doorstep? And that's basically it. I mean, even Salamanders, yeah, Salamanders are bad and they are known for flamers. So Salamander players usually will have more flamers, but every other legion with flamers will give you the same problems.
It's all down to how smart the person is with their list construction. Like me personally, if I was running salamanders, heavy
So
flamer jet bikes.
the biggest problem with militia I ever had was against Blood Angels that had a couple of bikes and a couple of storm cannons, and I wasn't knowing what I can do to stop my people dying.
Yeah, there's no way out of that. that's grab onto your ankles and start crying sort of
Yeah.
territory.
Um,
And yeah, it's a thing. Another one that actually can be quite a problem is Iron Warriors, because they're just so hard to shift, because your
the thing
shitting will
is,
just have no impact on them.
you mean Iron Hands?
No, Iron Warriors, because they're morale,
Okay.
because they never take morale checks from shooting, which means as long as they've got one guy left alive on an objective, you have to find a way to deal with it. And that
Okay,
can be a
but
real problem if they're sending stuff into you.
okay, but then just maybe let's finish then on the provenances, and then I will come back to this because we can also talk a little bit about the pros of the militia army list because it isn't all bad. What we are
Oh
talking,
no,
what we are talking.
I'm just trying to get all the cons out of the way
Okay,
ahead of
okay.
time.
So when you want to get the cons together, it's they are slow, they are squishy, and those are the big two concerns you have.
Yeah, that's it. That's the biggest thing. They're a soft army, in theory. They can be harder than they look, because now we've given everyone, obviously there's all these things that are wrong with them. There's also a lot that's right with them. So I guess we'll finish the provenances and then we'll go into all the good things about the army.
Okay. Yeah, the most expensive provenance actually is gene crafted to make your militiamen halfway space marines, increasing their strength by 1, but they can never benefit from feel no pain. And this is a big issue because feel no pain is for many of your troops your best save. Yeah, and they get +1 initiative, but that won't help them too much.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that looks good. Like if you combined it with, I don't know, Alchem Jack as a warrior elite, maybe you could do something really good with it, or Feral
With
Warriors. But again, it
or
runs into the
Abhuman
same.
Helots, yeah.
Yeah, it just runs into the same problem of, congratulations, you've now made a weaker marine.
Arguably a
What?
cheaper marine, but yeah, it's weaker in the important sections, and that is a resilience there.
And again, a 3+ save on a marine versus at
5,
best 4+ save
yeah.
on your guy. It's a big deal.
And then there are just 2 generic left. We have Feral Warriors. Feral Warriors gives everything +1 weapon skill, or Ogrins get +1 attack. It's decent, but it won't help you.
Yeah, it's tough. A lot of these provinces specifically give bonuses to Ogrins.
Or
But
give
we'll
other
talk about
bonuses to
Ogrins.
Ogrins, yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about Ogrins in a bit, but suffice to say, you can't really build your army around Ogrins.
No, they're too expensive. They are a great unit, but too expensive to have them as your core.
And you just don't have enough of them to get the job done.
Yeah. And the last ones are Abhuman Helots, so this means your squads, your beastmen, whatever. And the entire army gets +1 toughness, but -1 initiative. And this is actually a great one in my opinion, because +1 toughness will help you out a lot. You are getting feel no pain against assault cannons. You are not just dead when a bolter points at you.
Plus, the loss of initiative isn't really a big deal because generally you'll be striking after everyone else anyway.
Yeah, And for
Plus, discipline collars aren't a bad upgrade option either.
yeah, they are okay. And with Abhuman Helots, you can do so much cool conversions with your Fantasy Beastman army plus some Orc arms or something.
I
I
really like the idea of the Zangors or those beastmen that came in the Blackstone Fortress. Those
Yeah,
sort of snap fit beastmen guys, because you can
yeah,
pick
but
them up pretty cheap.
when you want to make a whole army that is not just copy-pasted models, you can actually take Fantasy Beastmen and give them the arms of just regular 40k orcs, and it works rather well.
Yep, which well, that's why I mentioned the Zangors
Yeah,
because they're pretty cool. And I'm a Zenge boy, so obviously I'm a big fan of the Birdmen.
sure. And there are two additional provenances, but they are traitor only, and this is the Cult Horde. And the Cult Horde was, in the early days of the list, the go-to for every militia army, but they nerfed it in a pretty hard spot. So initially it gave you Zealot for the whole army, so your troops are fearless, basically, that's the main thing. Um, by now they are stubborn and gain hatred instead.
Which I think everyone can agree is for the better. It was
Yes,
just a no brainer. A lot of people would take Cult Horde um, where possible back in the early days, or Survivors of the Dark Age. They were the two ones that people would gravitate towards. I found.
and the last one is Tainted Flesh, and Tainted Flesh gives you fear, okay. Feel No Pain 6 plus, it's again a role that you have to do all the time and it doesn't do much. And more importantly, it gives you rending. And with this rending combined with some of the other close combat provenances, you can actually get somewhat proficient in it. But not good. Just okay-ish.
I generally feel that Abhuman Helots and Tainted Flesh is probably the most survivable of all of them. Even though your normal armor save is worse, the fact that you're going to be getting just constant feel no pains across the army being toughness 4 is a big deal.
Yeah,
If you put Tainted Flesh on toughness 3, pray the other guy doesn't have Volkites. Because a 10-man Volkite squad, heavy weapons team, of any legion, let alone ones that are better at shooting, will kill 50 militia with Tainted Flesh because you won't get your feel no pain against strength 6.
when you're not in cover, yes.
Yeah, it's huge the amount of damage that Volkites can dish out. So they're very much the hard counter, which is why you've got to play very smart with your list construction with which ones you put with which when it comes to provenances, because what looks good on paper and what you think may be very viable might not turn out to be so good when you actually try it.
Yeah. So these are the provenances of war. They are basically where you start when you start to build up an army for militia, if you want to theme it in any way. Um,
All right, so when it comes to the additional HQ options,
yes,
um, do you prefer to take them, or
yes, definitely, definitely.
um, or are there some you would say to avoid?
Um, the command squad isn't that big of a deal, except for one thing. And Marines will laugh about that, but the main character of the command squad can actually take plasma pistols, and plasma weaponry in the militia list is valuable. You don't have it in much slots, and to have two plasma pistols on this guy can help you out in some occasions when you just need those AP2 shots. Otherwise,
He's ballistic skill 4 well as well.
yeah.
We should point out, so he is better at shooting than others.
In addition, it is the only source of a Nuncio Walks you can get in the entire army.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal.
So for these two reasons, the command squad does have its place in the army list. Uh, the second,
I'd say it's less common though. I don't see it very often. Not
yeah,
that I
but
play. I've only played maybe 3 militia armies recently.
but when I play my militia army, when I can, I try to include this command squad into the army. Even and in addition, you have a big fancy banner, and everyone likes big fancy banners.
Oh, it looks great. Looks great.
The second additional HQ choice you can have is Discipline Master Cadre, so it's basically your good old commissars. And for an army that lacks in leadership, this is a godsend basically. What it does is it's a little bit like an apothecary detachment. You can buy 2 to 5 of them in one slot, and then you can give them to different infantry units in your army, boosting their leadership and giving you a reroll for getting some wounds on the unit. Not even killing models, just getting some wounds.
I find that because the power weapon is such a cheap choice for them, it's a pretty good
Yes.
model to put like power axes on, just so you can get some quick wounds in there on Space Marines.
And the
The
thing
rest
is,
of your unit will die, but at least he will do something.
they have weapon skill 4, which is nice. 2 attacks with 2 weapons, so 3 attacks, it's good. But they have 2 wounds, making them surprisingly resilient. And you can give them refractor fields. And when you play Cyber Augmatics, boosting this refractor field to actually a 4+ save, they are not that bad as a last-ditch close combat effort against a sergeant or something.
Or even the fact that they can bring melter bombs is quite important,
Yep.
because even a single melter bomb can actually turn the tide of a battle. If someone's not paying attention, they might have, say, a land raider or an artillery vehicle, and they think to themselves, oh, it's only a militia squad, they're not going to hurt it, and they just sit there and ignore you, and then you run up to them with one of these guys, and then, hey, here's a melter bomb for your efforts, and there goes a, 200-point land raider, and it's cost you, a 25-point discipline master cadre. Like, it's no-brainer.
Yep. And some of your units, especially the Ogrins we talked about earlier, they need this leadership support. You can run Ogrins with a Force Commander, but even he only has a Leadership 8 base without any Provenance, and that is okay, but not good.
Um, I suppose the last HQ we should go on to, the Rogue Psyker. What do you think?
It is the only Psyker they have. It is really, really cheap. I mean, I'm not talking about the base Rogue Psyker, I'm just talking about the Alpha Psyker, because you can have one of them per detachment. And for 60 points, you have a level 2 Psyker. That is not too bad.
See, I have a massive problem with Psykers in general, and I think here you have a unit which, I mean, unlike a Marine, at least it's cheap enough to justify the randomness of the psychic abilities. Plus, if you get that funny Perils of the Warp fail and you get the possession result and he turns into a possessed, that's kind of good because that's a massive upgrade as far as I'm concerned.
Well, he can't
Um,
do Psyker stuff then anymore, but
but again, if he perils, better that he turns into something useful than my Thousand Suns army where he explodes and my whole army
okay,
gets
yeah.
pinned.
But
Plus he becomes then probably the best combat unit in the army.
but to have a model that is relatively cheap in an army that is always having some points to spare if you really want um, to have the option for this, I don't know, 4+ Feel No Pain from Biomancy for a squad, that's definitely worth it. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is that between the Force Commander, the Discipline Master, and the Command Squad, there is not always space for a Rogue Psyker. except when you are taking, is it? Yeah, the Tainted Flesh Provenance, where you do not have access to Discipline Master Carders or the Command Squad, then you even have to take the Rogue Psychers just for their leadership to
Yeah, it's
spread
all
it
you've
over
got.
the army.
Even the Rogue Alpha is not a bad choice in that regard, and a tainted weapon
It's,
for
it's
5 points,
nice.
it's actually pretty good. It's pretty good.
I wish my Word Bearers had them for 5 points.
Yeah, everyone wishes word bearers have them for 5 points. Then we get into the militia infantry squads. So these are sort of your main things. So essentially, you've got militia, infantry, inducted levies, and grenadiers. They're your three sort of core squads that most people will be taking in their compulsories.
Well,
Then
they
you've
have
got
to
your
take
sort of
them for
fire support
compulsories, yeah.
and reconnaissance as your
Support squads.
non-compulsory support
Yeah.
ones.
The,
Just quickly on these, which are your preferred?
militia infantry squads. I mean, the levies are not worse than them in a meaningful way, except for they cannot have an Medicaid. But I don't like those 50-man blobs on the field. They slow the game down so much, they annoy everyone, even the one playing them most of the time. So Imperialis militia infantry squads are my favorite for the basis of an army in the militia.
Yeah, I agree. The only way to viably play with the levies is to take the Cold Horde Tainted Flesh, and essentially they're like proto Nurgle zombies from the old 40k Nurgle zombies, if people remember them, because you'll end up with hundreds of models on the table that are very hard to kill thanks to stubbornness and feel no pain. But the problem is it's you need movement trays to move them around, and nobody wants to build and paint 300 bloody models for that purpose. It's not enjoyable to play with or against. It's time consuming more than anything, because the end result is still going to be the same. They are all going to die. It's just a matter of when, and if it takes you 3 hours to play 2 turns of your game.
Yeah. And the Grenadier squad, I really like it for more like a special unit. I have one in my army, and it's more like sitting in this Arvus, getting in the game late, clearing an objective in the back lines of the enemy, and hopefully sitting there until the end of the game. It's not your main infantry, but more like your forward squad that, yeah, can threaten objectives that are not reachable by foot.
Yeah. As I say, Grenadiers, my big problem with them is just the transport problem. They can have some great war gear, but if you can't utilise the war gear because you can't get them there or get them to survival enough to do anything with it, what's the point in taking them?
No.
So I
Uh,
mean, we're not
Reconnaissance.
the know-it-alls of it. We obviously have our opinions. It doesn't mean that people shouldn't try it.
No,
But I
no.
think most people would come to the same conclusions as us after a while.
Leaving two, Reconnaissance Squad and Fire Support Squad. I'm starting with the Reconnaissance Squad. The Reconnaissance Squad in and of itself isn't that great. It's with 50 points for 5 guys, it's really expensive. But for 5 points you can give them an AP, an Strength 8 AP2 grenade on 6 inches range, and they have Scout and Infiltrate, which is fun. Um, I like them for what they can potentially do. The biggest problem a militia player has with them is that they take up a troop slot, and this troop slot will not see the end of the game.
No. I mean, on the surface, you can be tempted to put a lot of points into them. Go for the sniper rifles, go for the chameleon, cloaks, they get the increased cover save. But
it's
honestly,
still just 5 guys.
yeah, it's a lot of points. It's a lot of points, and you know you're going to lose them. And for the same amount of points, the amount of other stuff you could get is a big deal. I think a squad of them,
Yeah, one
if
or
you
two
could put them in an
squads.
Arvis Lighter, for instance, and get them around the battlefield with that, or maybe, in a pinch, a Termite, although it is very expensive, and hopping out and throwing a Demolition Charge, potentially you'll get some points back on that might make it worth it. Potentially. I wouldn't build a strategy around it.
It's even okay to just outflank them, so the enemy has to stay a little bit away from the flanks or is risking the demolition charge in the face. But yeah, it's a one-trick pony, and that's it.
The Imperialis Auxiliary Medicaid Attachment now, moving into elites.
We skipped
I
the
think
fire
it's...
support squad
Oh yes, sorry, yep. So we'll go back a step.
because the fire support squad is actually a big deal. It is basically a heavy weapon squad, but it's troops, and it can have all the weapons you can have for Marines, and then some, but you don't want them anyway. So you have those las cannons, autocannons, heavy bolters, flamers, missile launchers, whatever. They have one really big problem, and that is leadership 6.
Yeah, you have to put the equivalent of a commissar with them, the discipline cadre,
Yes.
if you want them to hang around. Because they will get shot at.
Or you have to, well, they are the main target when you play Merchant Princeling.
Merchant Princeling on either the missile launchers or the autocannon.
It doesn't really work with almost all of them. Maybe a little bit less for the last cannon, but even, yeah, like I said, heavy flamers with AP3, then they don't need a commissar either, because then they are a fire and forget squad anyway. This is working surprisingly well if you set it up right.
Well, the mortars are quite good as long as you can keep them out of line of sight. If you can keep them hidden, that's quite a good option. The autocannon is the one I bring up because people love to put AP3 autocannons. Just because it's so punishing on Marines and has the multiple shots. The missile launchers, it's a double win because not only do they go to AP2, so they become incredibly devastating to Terminators, but even the frag and the frag missiles on them goes up by an AP value. And so you end up with AP4 frag.
And depending on what you do in your heavy support, AP2 might be a huge deal for you.
Yeah, exactly. On the frag missiles, for instance, going to in a mirror match versus other militia or up against Solar Auxilia, AP4 frag missiles is huge because all they'll have basically at that point is cover saves or feel no pain. Because the best part of the Solar Auxilia is their void hardened armor, which gives them that 4+ rerollable save against blast weapons. Well, this just removes the need for them to even save in the first place, and it dramatically speeds up the shooting phase against them.
Definitely. Speaking of Feel No Pain, the Medicaid Attachment.
Yeah, if you're not using Tainted Flesh, I think this is still a must-take.
Almost, yes. It's not as expensive as a single apothecary for Marines, but you are getting 3 already, and you can take, another 3? Yeah, another 3 for 10 points each. So it's a steal.
So for 70 points, that's 6 units that are now packing Feel No Pain.
But as you are rather restricted what units can actually benefit, you don't need much more than, 4 of them.
Generally, one of the other good things about them is they're actually leadership 7. So when you do attach them to units, like the fire support team we were just talking about, It's not much, but 7 and 6 is a huge deal because 7 is the magical leadership number
So
that is the exact average on 2d6.
you can sacrifice your sergeant and you still have leadership 7.
And believe me, you do want them on your fire support squads. You want the better leadership if you can, and you want the feel no pain.
Or just in your regular infantry squads, just to have feel no pain on 20 guys.
Plus, again, it's basically a 10-point upgrade to add an extra 2 attacks into your squad.
Yeah,
so if you're taking one of the combat, if you're taking one of the close combat heavy Provenances, that makes you better at fighting in assaults. It's a few extra attacks. It's not going to turn the game around for you, but it might help you. You never know. So there's a lot of bonuses to be had for very, very few points. I think that's the key. 10 points is what it's going to cost you for one of these guys. That's nothing. That's not even a Marine.
Next is the Ogren Brute Squad. So the Ogrens are your perfect bodyguard for an HQ if you want one.
Let down by cost. Not that they're badly costed, but the temptation is always going to be there to take lots of them. And if you do take lots of them and equip them with all the fun toys, they will get very expensive very fast.
What I found working for me really good is a unit of 6 Ogrens, plus minus 1. Give them 2 power axes, because power axes are just a major thing with strength 6 then. The rest has combat shields, and stick them with the force commander who has a power fist. And you actually have not a unit that will go forward and charge the enemy, but it can stick in your backline and counter any charging unit that comes through your shooting.
Very common tactic. Very common. And just so happens to sync up with the models that Games Workshop sells in plastic, the Ogrens / Bullgrens, because they come with the shields and the grenade launchers on the arms, and which are all options they have. I generally, though, try and avoid weapons, ranged weapons with them, because they can't hit the side of a barn inside a barn.
Ich meine, if you want to a fun, useless unit, make them 10 Ogrens with heavy bolters and make them AP3. But yeah, it's a little bit like orc shooting. We have a lot of it. It doesn't hit anything, but when it hits, it hurts.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing you've got to remember with them, of course, is yes, they are toughness 5. Yes, they've got 3 wounds. That is still one Demolisher shell away from ceasing to exist, though. So deploy
anything
them
below
wisely.
Strength 10, however, you can tank. I mean, I took what was it? An orbital bombardment with them, losing 1 wound thanks to combat shields.
Yeah, something I've found that's actually nasty with them that you forget about is if someone has a Deredeo. Because Deredeo Dreadnought seems to hard counter these guys, especially hard if it's running the Arachnus laser cannons. Because not only is it an excellent vehicle sniper, but it just instant kills these guys. And then it just peppers in, some strength 6 AP3 missiles and some heavy bolters it's like the extra seasoning on the meal. So, yeah, that's one to think about as well with your deployment. If you're deploying, take consideration of the sort of units that are the hard counter to them. And essentially put these up against everything else. Because they're very tough. They're very tough. And if you can put them in a position where they're not getting hit by that strength 10 stuff that really will hurt you, then they can hold up the entire flank.
Yeah, they can hold. The Engine Seer Auxilia. Normally I would say this option is not too great in and of itself. The thing is that the other elite choices, and you only have the Engine Seers, the Ogrens, and the Medicaids, you don't want them you don't want so many of them anyway, and therefore a single engine seer auxilia just walking behind some of your tanks can help you out for small points.
There's some fun to be had with this unit, and that is taking the squad with the servitors all running phase plasma fusils and sticking them in your back line with improvisers and an augury scanner, so that if someone deep strikes in, you can get that free interceptor on them with all the phase plasma.
Yeah, sure. And in addition, just for
that's yeah.
well,
Sorry, go
on. Like a Tech Marine in Space Marines, when you take it, you can unlock Thalax and Castellax. And yeah, Castellax are nice, but for purely fluff reasons, I like Thalax in those Militia or even Solar Auxilia lists a lot, because when you read the background for Thalax, there are two kinds basically. You have the one from the Mechanicum, which are just mass-produced cyborgs, and you have the others that are basically a poor man's dreadnought. So you have maybe your veteran squad from the beginning of the Crusade who got mauled really bad, and they are still sticking with your force as a Thalax. Just as an idea behind such a squad.
Yeah, definitely a fun, fluffy way of doing it. Plus, they're very much like Ogrins, but faster. So the
But
toughness
they take up
5s,
one of
3
your
wounds,
heavy support squads, so
that is the letdown. But they can take heavy chain blades as well, which very strong option. I do have to admit a soft spot for Darkfire Cannon Castellax. So if
sure,
you
they
are
are
lacking
solid.
perhaps a bit of anti-vehicle capability, not a bad choice. Not a bad choice.
They are solid, yeah.
If you have a squad of 3 tech briefs engineers, which can be done for 105 points is all it will cost you. If you have those with Cyber Familiar, Refractor Field, they can be very tanky. I think it's not worth it though. I would take them generally with a Nuncio Vox and Augury Scanner. Maybe a Graviton gun is not a bad choice on the engine seers, because it's only 5 points, and if, again, someone deep strikes in, like a Dreadnought, you can knock all 3 hull points off that Dreadnought on 2s.
Yeah, but everything considered,
so that's a huge deal.
Everything considered, the engine seer auxilia is more like a points filler for the army. You have 100 points left, you don't know what to do with it, take an engine seer.
They can heal, if they've all got... I believe they can heal Cybernetica.
Yeah, they can heal.
So
they can heal Cybernetica,
you
but
can
they
heal
can
Castellax.
They can even heal vehicles better when you equip your what is it? The servo automata with
the servo arms.
With the servo arms, which is an option Space Marines weirdly do not have. So they can, in theory, heal your vehicles on 2+, which is nice.
And if you have 3 of them, 3 engine seers with 4 servo arm servitors, then you get 3 attempts on a 2+ to heal damage back on a vehicle or on a monstrous creature like a Castellax.
Yeah.
Which can be very strong if you stack them with some of the many Lords of War vehicles available to the army, or even just some of the tank squadrons, for instance.
Sure.
And it's not that expensive in points either, we should point out. Like, to add 2 engine seers to the unit, so you get 3 engine seers and 4 servo automata is 105 points. And then to give them servo arms will take you up to 125 points. And then, as I say, I like the 3 grav guns in there, just a grav gun on each guy, and they'll take you up to 140 points total. And that's a pretty decent unit for the points.
And grav guns with augury scanners are always great fun when you can combine them.
Alright, so we already spoke about the Arvis Lighter.
Yeah, we can
So I
skip
think
that,
we
I
just
guess.
skip to the Scout Sentinels.
Scout Sentinels, great unit. I mean, they are really cheap
Underrated unit.
compared to what they can bring. A unit of 6 Scout Sentinels with laser cannons is about the same as a 5-man squad Marines with laser cannons. They are shooting comparably good, so both are not too far apart from each other, but the Scout Sentinels are way more mobile, they are a little bit more durable, and yeah, all in all, a great unit to have outflanking heavy weapons.
Huge fan of them with multi-melters.
The biggest problem with the multi-melter Scout Sentinel is that there is no model for it from Games Workshop in plastics. But it's a solid option.
And an easy conversion, really.
If you have the parts, yes. I was just lazy
Um,
and did the
yeah.
last cannons.
Yes, that's Games Workshop.
And I
They've
mean,
been doing it for decades.
even with the last cannons, they are still rock solid. You cannot complain about them.
The las cannons are the slightly less aggressive option because you can play them very defensively and use their good speed, the ability to move through cover to sort of,
Yeah.
pop out from behind a building, fire off some shots into some enemy vehicles, and then pull back. Whereas the multi-melters, you really use the most out of that scout rule. And even if it's just 3 of them, it's only going to be 120 points. You have to deal with it. You can't just let those multi-melters get close to you because they're going to do that scout move. and they're going to be within range of those multi-melters in turn 1. So you've got to do something about it, or they're going to outflank you. So either way, it's bad for you.
Okay, yeah.
So I think a strong and underrated unit, anyway.
Definitely. Same goes for the Thunderbolt, in my opinion. I mean, the Thunderbolt is not a lightning in quality of what you get for your points, but it's still solid with, what does it have? 4? Yeah, 4 missiles, strength 6, AP2 with armor bane. That's okay. And yeah, you can't complain too much about it. 2 las cannons, 2 autocannons. Light vehicles really have a problem when you have a Thunderbolt, and with this combat interdiction rule, as soon as your enemy plays some what's called skimmers or jet bikes, even jet bikes, right? No, just skimmers. Um,
Just
yeah,
skimmers,
it's rather reliable on the field turn 2.
I think it's better than the Xiphon, the Legion Fire.
You could
Personally,
argue,
I think it's
you
better.
could argue
It's got
because yeah,
well, the big thing for me is it has an extra hull point.
yeah, that's
Hull
right.
points are huge when it comes to flyers. The difference between 2, 3, and 4 is massive because they're only armor 11 and 10, but that means when they do get hit, generally they only lose a hull point. It's very rare for something to get through and just outright blow them up. So having that extra hull point is a huge deal to me, coming from having played a lot with Legion flyers, having owned Raven Guard and White Scars, both of which I use flyers in.
On the other hand,
The
yeah,
majority of anti-air weapons are only strength 7,
sure.
and they're only AP3. So even if the enemy does get shots at you, they're unlikely to penetrate. And if they do penetrate, it's only a 50% chance that they're even going to glance you. So, 30%, 33% chance they're going to penetrate. If they do, they can't blow you up. So the more hull points you have, the better, because you just don't jink, you take the hit, and then you get off your strike anyway.
And in the context of the army list, you can always afford to make this one a little bit more expensive. So give it a wiggle room of 20 points for upgrades, and then you can either take a flare shield, which is nice, or upgrade its missiles to Sun Fury missiles, which are not too bad either, with a large blast and AP3.
Just to add on to what I was just saying about the survivability, the simulacra repair. So if you do take that glancing hit, you roll a d6, and on a 6, you just ignore the glancing hit. So the
Uh,
survivability on it is a lot more than implied.
yeah, but it's again like those 6+ feel no pains. You roll for them, but most of the time nothing happens.
The only difference is, unlike the 6+ feel no pains and the 6+ invulnerable saves that sometimes float around, is that you won't be making many of them.
Yeah.
Only a couple of shots per turn are going to get through, so therefore you're only going to be rolling a couple of dice each turn. It's not like having, say, 6+ invulnerable save on a 50-man unit that's getting shot by everything.
Sure.
Very different
But it
kettle
can
fish.
add up. Yeah.
Alright, the Rapier Battery.
First of the heavy supports.
I like them. I think they're really good, but you've got to know how to use them.
Yes, definitely. The thing is that they have the quote-unquote problem that they are too expensive if you want to fill up points for a list. Because you can sink at a maximum with, let's just say quad mortars are not an option here because I will come to this in a second. You can fill up with those at maximum 150 points. And when you want to make a list of 2,500 or 3,000 points, this can come around because you are running out of slots. Despite that, they are a great option for what they bring for those points.
I like almost all the weapons options. I'm a bit mixed on the quad mortar on these. I like Legion quad mortars.
Yeah, the thing is that
I
here,
don't really...
just as an explanation, here you only have frag shells, so only the big template strength 5 twin-linked one.
Exactly. So, although you can get shells out and you can do it from behind cover, the thing is, you're not really making the most of your points because you're almost doubling the points cost of the unit by taking that option. Frankly, the multi-lasers are fine.
They are fine, yes, they're really fine. But my
It's a lot of shots. It's a lot of shots.
my favorite is the laser destroyer. I like laser destroyers.
Yep, agreed. Good against vehicles and also good harassing fire against units like jet bikes and terminators. You will force jet bikes to jink, and you will kill terminators with it. Just it's the way it is.
Yeah, another problem they have is they only have leadership 6, and you cannot add an commissar to them because they are not infantry.
No, it is. It's a big deal for them. The only saving grace is that they are so tough. Unless the enemy actually targets you with something good. I'm referring to something like heavy bolter or better, essentially.
Yeah. Well, heavy bolter is not the big problem. Then they're not really
going to take the wounds, so it won't be forced on them too much.
Heavy bolter is still not the big problem. Still wounding only on 6, not the big deal. But
exactly. I think more just in the amount of firepower heavy bolter puts out at distance. Obviously, a different kettle of fish if it's a shrapnel heavy bolter from the Iron Warriors or an acid heavy bolter of the Dark Angels. Because the Dark Angels one is a nightmare for you. And the Iron Warriors one will also force pinning checks, which is bad for you because you're a heavy weapons team and you don't want to be snap firing these things. And if you take the quad mortar and you do get pinned in any way, then you're double screwed because you can't fire at all.
Same for the laser destroyer because you can't fire ordnance.
It's ordnance.
Yeah.
Yep. Bingo.
And another thing that is a huge difference gameplay-wise with Legion quad mortars or any rapier, you always put, or almost always put 3 Marines in the front, so the enemy has to kill 5 wounds until your firepower is reduced. You do not want to do this here because then you are forcing leadership checks on the way. In my opinion.
Rapier itself has a 3+ armor save, which is the best in the army. Some other units get it like the Tech Priest Engine Seers, but, neither here nor there. I also want to spruik the quad heavy bolter because not enough love is given to it. Now, in a Legion lists, you take heavy bolters for granted. There's something you upgrade to something better. But in this army, quad heavy bolters are devastating. If you go up against other militia, if you go up against Auxilia, or if you go up against even the Mechanicum, a lot of stuff in the Mechanicum only has a 4+ save.
And I just yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, quad heavy bolters, like, they will devastate Thalax. I think Myrmidons are also 4+ save.
No, they have 3+.
Myrmidons 3+. There you go. But they're toughness 5, so at least you'll wound them on 4s, whereas your las guns aren't going to do that. So, definite pros to having the weapon, and it gives you something that can hurt things like Castellax. I mean, you are fishing for 6s, but I'd rather be fishing for 6s than unable to hurt them at all.
Sure.
So do we want to go on to the vehicles now?
Yes. Do we really want to talk about the Malkador, or do we want to skip them until they hopefully fix it?
Well, yeah. The Malkador is obviously the vehicle we're referring to, and they're not in a great place right now because previously they were a super heavy vehicle, which meant you've got all these weapons on it. It moves quickly because it's a surprisingly fast super heavy vehicle, and you could bring all these weapons to bear. Doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
It had 6 hull points. You couldn't get stunned or shaken or anything like that, and essentially they've just taken that all away.
And the biggest thing is that you could fire 2 ordnance weapons at the same time, and now you fire your battle cannon or your demolisher cannon, and the rest is just crap.
And you're paying a huge amount of points to upgrade, like 30 points on a 235-point tank to go up to a demolisher cannon on its front hull. So it's not worth it anymore over the battle cannon.
Now, the Malkador, no. From all the Malkador variants, the basic variant got the hardest hit.
It's especially bad when you are comparing it to Lemon Russ squadrons.
Yes.
I would rather take a squadron of Demolisher Russes any day of the week.
Speaking of which, the next...
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about the Malkador, but as it is now, I don't want to. It's just...
Forge Orders tried to fix it because they felt that the rules for it, being a super heavy, meant that essentially it got treated the same as something like a Legion Felglaive, which is a 15 hull point, 700 point super heavy tank that's the size of your figure case, or a Mastodon. What they need to do is really just write new rules for something that's halfway in between for these small Lords of War type units, as opposed to just calling it a heavy tank.
For our local group, I wrote an homebrew FAQ, errata, whatever, and there I addressed this with a special rule that allowed it to have the spawns and weapons fire on different targets, like the Fire Raptor, and to ignore Ordnance, basically. That's the main 2 things.
Well, they used to have a special rule for Lehman Russ tanks and things like the Malkador back in 5th edition Guard, which was they were heavy tanks. So it meant you could always fire all your weapons, even though you had like Ordnance and that, you could always fire them at enemy units and such. And then when they went to 6th edition, they removed it, and they keep rules like heavy around for the tank now, and it doesn't really do much for it.
It's a negative, basically.
Yeah, because you go slower. So, you move that 6 inches, all of a sudden you're down to shooting basically your battle cannon. It's not worth it.
Yeah, speaking of which, the Lehman Russ?
Yeah, is there a bad variant? I don't really think there's a bad variant. They've all got their place, though, and...
I mean, the
I don't know about you, but I hate...
I don't like the Annihilator and the Exterminator. The Annihilator has a single last cannon shot for what amount of points? What does it cost? 140 points for a single last cannon? No. Just no.
Not great, but I still say I don't think they're bad, because at least then it's still a good platform. You still got all your sponsons and you can fire them all at full ballistic skill, which is something you can't do on, say, the
Militia
Demolisher.
it does have sponsons. Okay, yep.
Yeah, it's the Solar Auxilia that don't have the side sponsons. So you'll get your side sponsons, your front hull gun, and if you upgrade the pintle weapon.
But with
So
the
in theory, you
Annihilator,
could put out a lot of firepower.
with
Could.
the with the Annihilator, the sponsons are basically useless because they have another target profile. The only thing that's worthwhile is the last cannon in front of the tank, and then it's 150 points for two last cannons. I still don't really see it. I mean, it's durable, okay, I can accept that, uh, but it's my least favorite.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because if I was going to take one of those, I'd just take a Vanquisher instead.
Yeah. Definitely.
Obviously, I don't like to mix up my squadrons, is what I was going to say earlier. If I buy a tank squadron, I arm them all the same. So I want a
Yeah.
squadron of Vanquishers, or I want a squadron of Demolishers, because
Uh,
they've got a purpose.
Another big thing that compared to Solar Auxilia Leman Russ, which we can maybe cover another time then, is that they all have heavy, so they can only ever move 6 inches. They are all in the heavy attack, no, the heavy attack, in the heavy support slot, whereas Solar Auxilia has some of them even in fast attack. And they all have only 3 hull points, where a normal Leman Russ has 4. So
Yeah,
those
the only
the,
on the bright side though, we do have the rear armor of 11 on
for
the
the
Demolisher.
Demolisher, yes. And it's a huge deal sometimes when the enemy comes with crack grenades in close combat and you still survive it. Um, all in all, the Leman Russ with a front armor of 14 and a side of 13, in my opinion, is one of the best main battle tanks you can have in the game for its points cost.
Yeah, I always thought it was a bit too well armored for the amount of firepower it brings compared to the Legions. But this is going back even to 40k. When I first started playing the game, seeing how powerful Lim Russ was in second and third edition compared to the Predator, I was like, oh, what the hell? But for
Yeah,
me
but
now, I
Predator,
think it's in a good place because the rest of the army is so fragile. I think
yeah,
it really complements it.
and when you compare it
Um,
to the Predator got a nice upgrade with twice the amount of shots compared to 40k,
yep, Predator Cannon. Predator
and
Cannon is
giving
fantastic.
giving the Leman Russ this heavy rule, making them slower, really fits into this feel of you have those basically rolling bunkers um, that are punishing everything that comes too close or in line of sight, but they cannot advance really. They're too slow for that. So I really prefer the Demolisher version, and I like that it has the downside of a small range and it's slow, and yeah, it gives the opponent a little bit to play with me and not just suffer the barrage.
Agreed. Also, a note on squadron size. Yes, you can take an extra two, so you can have squadrons of three. Personally, I only ever run one type of Lemon Russ in a squadron of three, and that's the Solar Auxilia variant with the giant Volkite.
I
Normally,
mean,
I think two is plenty in a squadron.
the squadron of three has some pluses. In a militia list, what I already said is that you run out of slots, and when you take something like Rapier Squad in your heavy support, you have to put more points into another slot. So you are taking those squadrons because you do only have so much heavy support slots. Not because it's more powerful, but it's the only option to take the tank at all. In addition, it gives you the ability to spread your front armor 14 all around your front arc when you always face one tank in each direction.
I'm a big fan with the Militia, but again, not having played much of them at all in 30k, which I freely admit to, mostly just playing against them. 2 squads of 2, 2 with Demolisher Cannons, and 2 with Vanquishers is sort of my ideal for them. 1 for just crushing enemy infantry and vehicles in a pinch, and the other for sniping away important enemy vehicles like dreadnoughts and tanks. That's
a small side note.
Go for it.
Small side note. You can actually upgrade the heavy bolter on those things for free for a multi-laser, and in my opinion, you always should, because this additional strength is just plain better than the AP4 most of the time. Even when you are firing ordnance weapons, because snap firing strength 6, why not? And when you are already taking sentinels just for the modeling purposes, you can take those multi-laser perfectly and just put it in front of the Leman Russ, and you have 2 birds, 1 stone.
Looks good too. Looks real good. Plus, Leman Russ, they're sort of a centerpiece, I find, for your army. Like, there's nothing I like more than going to a really well-painted guard, militia, auxilia, what have you, army, and seeing what they've done with their tanks and just seeing some cool designs of tank. I think really one of those underrated things. You can have a lot of fun painting tanks. I've done for a sort of pseudo Lucifer Blacks theme with my Solrogs, so my tanks are black with white striping on the sides, and I've got a bunch of decals of a German Panther tank. So I've been using those. So, they've got like pictures like women riding bombs and stuff like that on the sides of them. But it works. It works. It looks really good for them. So a lot of fun to be had.
Next is the Heavy Ordnance Battery, and in my opinion, here comes the fun. This is basically distilled what it is to be militia. You are not moving, you have the big guns, and you have a lot of bodies.
So my question to you is, which is it, the Earthshaker or the Medusa?
Earthshaker. Definitely the Earthshaker.
Yep. Guaranteed. Every time.
Multiple reasons. Yes, the Medusa has its upsides, because you have the AP2. And when you are not taking the Medusa here, AP2 is a problem for you. On the other hand, not being able to move, the Earthshaker is just the reliable option. And it's so cheap that with a with a unit of 3 Earthshakers, you are not paying so many points, but they will fire every round at one target, and when they hit, they will demolish it.
Yep, it's that simple. I find the range on the Medusa is a big limiting factor. Because
they have the
remember, not every deployment.
Yeah.
Sorry, not every deployment in Horus Heresy gets you to deploy in the middle of the table.
And you don't want to be
because these are fixed in
middle
place.
of the table.
If you have something like no, God, no. If you have, say, a corner deployment, and you have to put these things in the corner of the table, that's more than half the table you can't touch with them.
Yeah.
And if it's an objective game, that's a big problem. If you're the offensive player as well, as you know, there are several missions, many missions in fact, where they rely on you getting into the opponent's deployment zone in order to score points. These things are useless.
Yeah.
Because they can't support your army as you move forward. In theory, you might say, oh, well, if the enemy comes into my deployment zone, that's fine.
But you always...
well, no, if the rest of your army's out trying to get into the enemy's deployment zone,
yes,
these things are just fragile on their own.
Because
they
for
really
scoring, you have to move forwards. And when you cannot support your troops while you move forwards, you will lose.
Whereas conversely, if you take the Earthshaker cannon, it doesn't matter if you're in the back corner, you will reach the other side of the table. And
the
you
next
can be
table.
putting down fire. Yeah, that's right. The person on the receiving end of you will have to do something about it. Which means instead of them just focusing on your infantry as you come forward, they're going to have to spend some sort of resources on dealing with your Earthshakers, or else you're going to pick them apart. 3 Earthshakers is nothing to sniff at. It is a lot of firepower.
Even if they only have AP3, they can mess up vehicles. And when the enemy puts more vehicles together in one spot, and you just shoot in the middle of them with the triple Earthshaker, you will hit something, and with Ordnance, you will do damage.
I mean, look, the temptation is there to go the Medusa anyway,
With
to
the
load the
breacher
breacher shells.
Yes.
But I think if you've already got Demolisher cannons in your army, they're probably better, because at least they're moving.
In addition, the enemy has to have some fun too. If I bring nothing but Demolisher and Medusa with breacher shells, no.
I do think it's one of the big failings of the army list is there should be a 0 to 1 option on the heavy ordnance battery, not 1 to 3 up to 3 units in your army. It's just too much firepower, especially when every other list is limited in taking this sort of gear.
On the other hand, they again only have leadership 6. And they cannot be supported by a commissar. So again, they need an HQ to stick with them, and it can only be the rogue psyker or your force commander.
See, the scary part of this army, for me personally, is if the other guy manages to bring along something like Legion Allies, perhaps Nuncio Voxes. If you can hide these things out of line of sight and just drop shells all day, if there's 9 of them, that's very, very unfun to play against.
For someone, I mean, maybe we have listeners here that have experience against Militia and they are struggling what they can do against Militia with exactly those units. There is an easy counter, and you might not like to hear it, but it's Psykers. When you can drop a Psyker, it doesn't matter what powers he rolls. It can be a level 1. Take a Psyker in a drop pod, drop him next to them, do a Psychic Shriek, and watch them run off the table.
Yeah, it's strong. This is definitely a counter. I'm also a fan of hitting them back with your own ordnance. So if you've got something like a Whirlwind Scorpius, because they're a barrage, you take casualties from the center of the template, which means generally people will put all their militia behind them and try and tank the hits on the 3+ armor save toughness 7 artillery carriages. If you can directly hit the crew behind them, it will take them out. It's really just down to, though, who gets turn 1. If they get turn 1, you're going to have a very rough turn 1.
The problem with this is... sorry,
I was just going to say, but if you have drop pod heavy army, Marines, for instance, Blood Angels, Day of Reckoning, that kind of thing, Day of Revelation, it's going to be the polar opposite, because you're not going to get a chance to shoot at them before they're up your ass.
The problem with counter shelling against this unit is that it can have up to 24 models of crew, and with toughness 7, that's a lot to go through.
It is, but again, if you drop Ordnance, it's based on the model it touches, not the unit average.
No, it is not.
But if you have...
For artillery, it's
have
always
20...
the toughness of the artillery model.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I thought once you had you have the 20 crew, there's more average models of toughness 3 than toughness 7.
As long as you have...
Well, even then, a Whirlwind Scorpius will still wound them on 3s. So.
Yes. But the question is...
regular Whirlwind, which no one will ever take, nor should they ever take, won't be a concern.
Yeah, the regular Whirlwind is a beast of its own.
Yep.
Okay.
Anything that kills multi-wound units is also something to be worried about, like force weapons.
But in close combat, you never attack the artillery model, always just the crew. So
That's just the example I picked. It
yeah,
was a bad example.
for shooting there
There are
aren't
other things that, yeah.
for shooting there aren't that many except for destroyer weapons.
There's a couple of things out there that could do it. But yeah, pitting is a big deal for them, and leadership
Yes.
checks. Alright, what about the Mutant Spawn, which is sort of a unique...
Yeah, you have to be Tainted Flesh to take them, and well, they are a unit with a
worse
taste.
Ogrins?
Well, not not so much. I mean, they are a little bit cheaper, and they have unit type beasts, so they actually move rather fast. And with toughness 5, 3 wounds, they are somewhat durable.
I mean, they cause fear, they are fearless, they do have rage, they do have Hammer of Wrath, they are strength 5. On the surface it looks good, but that D6 attacks, this suffers from the same thing that the old Chaos Spawn did in 40k, which was, you don't know what you're getting.
My bigger concern is that they are heavy support. If they were elite or fast attack, it would be a yes. They would be good. But in heavy support, where the main firepower for Militia has to come from, it's a no.
Well, heavy support for every army is the most important slot. Every
Not
single
for
army.
not for every army. I mean, Legion army. Not for every army. I mean, Legion armies can do with elite and fast pretty good.
I suppose you're correct, but that's, I guess, if you spec heavily down that path.
You have to take some choices
or
like
drop
dreadnoughts
pods or jet
rapier
bikes,
batteries.
things
But
that really
as the rapier batteries
counter.
are, yeah. But as the rapier batteries are also heavy support in this army, they are
Again,
relying heavily on
Lehman
that
Russ
slot.
is great because many hull points, lots of armor, relatively moderate-sized vehicles, so good line of sight blocking.
Yeah.
You want to take them because they're going to be a shield for your army, and they're going to be hard for the enemy to destroy, and the enemy's going to want to destroy them. And that's a big thing, is making your opponent do what you want, and you want them to be focused on trying to kill your tanks.
But
you take this, no, I don't know that you're going to have that effect. Not in heavy support.
well, if you play 1,000 or 1,500 points game, then you can think about playing a Mutant Spawn.
There are certain things you need to keep in mind, and you need to stay away
Because then
from
you
them.
have the open slots.
For a start, Psychers just a hard counter. You have no armor save, so every wound that gets through with a force weapon is just going to kill them. Also, Custodes with Soulrite Gauntlets.
Yeah.
Less common, but they're out there. So, and there are several Marine characters who are Strength 5 and have Power Fists or Thunderhammers as well. And many of those also get to strike first.
Well, even normal Marines with just punching with their fists.
Yeah,
will
unless
kill
they
them
mutate
because
it. They
have
can
no
mutate
armor
a
save.
5+ armor save. Yeah, yep. I'm terrified, right? I'm sure that a Custode
I'm afraid now.
with a Soulrite Gauntlet and a shield, who means you only hit him on 6s, is really going to be scared of your 5+ save when he...
So, the Mutant Spawn is okay, but it's not
I guess if you're
anyway.
lucky and you have a huge unit of them and you get Toxic Plasm and you get Rending on the whole squad, then maybe?
Yeah, then they will
If they
wipe
don't
out
all
one
die
squad
before they get
and then
there.
they will be gunned down.
Alright, so Super Heavies, Lords
Sure.
of War. Now this is
Okay.
I think, the hardest one to pick, because there are a few good options here. I think where people go wrong is... sorry.
Well, they have native just 2 options.
Yes.
without any extended lists or whatever. They only have the Baneblade and the Stormhammer from the Solar Auxilia. And both are solid.
Except for the fact that there are many other types, and that's where it gets foggy, which is the little asterisk I want to put in there. People get that little gleam. Yeah, they get that little gleam in there,
But
right?
this
They're like,
is
I
the
can
same
take
for
this, or
every
I can
heresy
take this,
army.
or I can take this. When it comes to picking one of these, pick something that complements your army. That's the big thing. Don't just take it because it's a really good Lord of War. Because if it's redundant, if everything it does, something else does better, then maybe it's not the best Lord of War for you. And that's why I like the Baneblade and the Stormhammer. They're just good all-rounders.
I mean, what... Yeah, also the Storm Sword, if you go in this extended list of possible super heavies, the Storm Sword is always an option because the plasma cannon is just solid.
Yeah, big plasma blast gun, very scary, Titan weapon. I'd probably avoid taking. I think I can take a Shadow Sword, but I'd avoid it. Yes.
Or the Doom? Is it Doomhammer?
Yes.
The Doomhammer, which is basically the Typhon?
No, not Stormhammer. That's the other attack.
Stormhammer? I don't know. I can't tell them apart.
Yeah, I've got it anyway.
It was some hammer.
But, yeah, it's basically a Typhon. That one's pretty good. Alright, so the Baneblade. Essentially, a Lehman Russ just dialed up to 11. Well, 9, actually. Dialed up to 9 hull points.
And then some,
it's got a gigantic 10-inch blast version of the battle cannon, which is AP2 strength 9. It's strong. It's got a hull-mounted demolisher. It's got twin heavy bolters on its sponsons. You can change it to multi-melters, heavy bolters, lots of sponson options here. I do recommend taking the Armoured Ceramide on it. Unlike on, say, a Rhino or a Saber, these weird tanks that Forge World insists on giving Armoured Ceramide options to, this thing costs so many points you do want to protect it, and it has enough armour that it will be protected by it, because all of a sudden...
On the other hand, you have enough bodies to shield it from anything in melter range, or almost anything in melter range, so if you are running really low on points for some reason, you can let it away, so it's okay.
It's viable, is what I'm getting at.
If you
it's viable.
Take it.
It's not silly to take like it is on other units.
Yeah, sure.
But I think it's 535 points. It's not that expensive. You can upgrade to a super heavy command tank, which is probably worth it.
And I'm just looking it up because I always forget what exactly it does. There, super heavy command tank. Reroll failed morale checks, definitely. In a militia army, definitely worth.
So yeah, at the points, it's worth it. I mean, it's sort of boring, I suppose, compared to a lot of the other options, which have just insane firepower. For instance, like a strength 7 AP1 ignores cover saves gun is terrifying, but this is versatile. Yeah, exactly.
But
It's only
strength 9 AP2 is it's always has a target.
You've got a good vehicle when the worst thing you can say about it is it's only a strength 9 AP2 72-inch range 10-inch blast.
Yeah, it is only killing everything.
Yeah, okay,
it
doesn't ignore cover. That's the downside of it. Oh no. Except it fires shells so big it
will not.
It fires shells so big it just removes whole areas of armies. Then we got the Stormhammer, which is not one you see a lot of because it's an expensive Forge World tank, but they are out there and they are good.
Yes. The biggest problem with the Stormhammer, in my opinion, is to not go overboard with equipping every point with a last cannon. Because then it gets really expensive. I mean, any of its multi-lasers, and they are... how many? 1, seven multi-lasers you can exchange for laser cannons. That's 70 points in addition, and some of them pointing to the rear.
I
So
prefer the multi-lasers. Maybe the heavy flamers to make it a bit of
just
a meme tank. Have a bit of fun with it. If you take the heavy flamers, no point taking the targeters, because they will give you +1 ballistic skill, but it's not worth it on the flamers. However, if you keep the multi-lasers, take the targeters and the super heavy command tank, and maybe the armored ceramite, because it's got even better hull points than a Beyblade. It has 10 of them, and yeah, it's got them. It's nice
which
to
is
have.
not that big of a deal, but yeah.
I think it's 3 hull points is what you can lose from copying a penetrating hit that rolls a 6. So D3 +1. So it might come in handy. The average roll there will be 3. So it might leave you on 1 hull point. But, things are going pear-shaped for you already if that happens. So the multi-lasers...
Most super heavies, in my experience, most super heavies die in close combat to power fists or something
Melter
like
bombs, power fists,
and there
chain
it doesn't
fists,
make a huge difference.
Dreadnoughts, all those sort of things are the big things for Hordes of War to avoid. But the targeters, putting you up to ballistic skill 4 is huge on that many multi-lasers. But again, they're more of a situational bonus, because the big thing is the Stormhammer cannon and the dual battle cannon. The Stormhammer is almost identical to the Beyblade cannon, except it's a slightly shorter range. Yeah, a little bit. And the shred, so you get to reroll to wounds, which is huge. This is a marine killer.
Yeah. But shred on anything past strength 7, it's nice to have, but it's nothing I point out as this is a big plus for the weapon.
Yeah, it pretty much can't go wrong. Even an often overlooked thing is strength 9. 9 is kind of one of those key numbers in Heresy. There's a lot of stuff that is toughness 4 and 5 and has feel no pain. Strength 9, if you play, say, Iron Hands, for example, your toughness 4 and you drop the weapon strength down to an 8, well, it's still instant kills. So it's very good for that sort of thing.
It's still sufficient. And with strength 9, you actually get, or start to get, a decent chance against front armor 13. Whereas with strength 8, a single shot hitting me, I'm not that afraid.
Lots of goodness to be had in this. Then you've got the dual battle cannon. And the dual battle cannon is... it's a bit of a funny one because it's not in a turret. So you do actually have to think about where to move the tank to get the right angle. Because...
I think it's...
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's got, 180-degree arc almost on it. So... because it is like a turret, but it is... not a turret, sorry, a fixed traverse mounting. So it can slightly move to each side, a fair bit though. But you have to be cognizant of where your front armor is pointing. You really want to be pointing your best armor towards the enemy at all times. It's not worth turning to face, your armor 13 towards an enemy to get a better battle cannon shot.
Not for the dual battle cannon.
Probably not worth it. Not when you have an actual turret, the Stormhammer, that you can rotate instead. So just something to be cognizant of.
And weapons with big blasts and multiple shots are really good compared to single shot weapons from this, because you actually count all the hits before removing models. So having a unit that can dish out multiple shots with a big blast at once is better than having multiple units doing the same thing.
Because they're not removing the models that it could potentially
You get what I'm saying.
Which is huge.
Yeah. Which is funny, which is funny because this is another plus side for Lehman
Yep,
Russ
definitely,
squadrons.
definitely. As I say, I'll stick to my guns on this. If I have the Vanquisher Squadron and the Demolisher Squadron, they're doing two different jobs. Not that you couldn't go to 3, especially in a bigger points game, I definitely would. But at a squadron of 2, generally will meet my purposes. The exception being if I take a command tank Vanquisher in Solar, but that's for another story. Because I think... Yeah, no, go on.
The only downside I see with the Stormhammer is that it only has one really versatile weapon with the Stormhammer cannon, whereas the Baneblade has 2 with the Baneblade cannon and the Demolisher cannon, because the dual battle cannon quote-unquote only has AP3, so you won't fire it against Terminators most of the time, and it only has strength 8, so it's not as good against armor. So the Stormhammer is more geared towards infantry in this, and that's why I would prefer to give it some las cannons to make up for this, I would say, lack in
Perfectly acceptable option.
Armor penetration.
By the way, it was the Storm Sword and the Bane Hammer we were thinking of earlier. The Doom Hammer is the one which has that weird, has like the
Bane Hammer. Okay.
The muzzle brake of a volcano cannon slapped onto the gun of a Bane Hammer. Looks ugly.
Okay.
And then there's the Hell
I
Hammer, which no one ever takes.
Forget which one is which.
So yeah, well, that's 2 hours now, so I think that's probably a good point to wrap up on the Militia. We might come back to this another day and talk about Auxilia and make these our own sort of episodes, I think.
In close comparison, because they are similar in some ways, but vastly different in
everything
others.
That the Militia lack, the Solar Auxilia make up for, but conversely, a lot of the things that the Militia have, which are really good, the Solar Auxilia completely lack. It's the nature of the beast. Got to be different. All right.
Okay.
No, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very
Always
much
appreciate
for
it, man,
having me.
because it gives a great contrasting viewpoint to my own. Because obviously, I don't know everything. We need other people to talk to and give us their ideas and say, hey, did you consider this viewpoint? And I do really appreciate that.
Then talk to you another time.
Thanks very much. You too, mate.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for watching this episode. We'll see you all next time.